Hello everyone. Today I will be showing you some basic building blocks of programming, and we'll even walk through a short coding exercise that uses all the pieces we learn. Also, make sure to check out the LibGuide that goes along with this video to find the specific code editor that I am using today, as well as some other helpful resources. There are all kinds of programming languages to choose from. Today we'll be using Microsoft's C# language. C# is typed C. Oh, like that. I'll also be using a program called Microsoft Visual Studio. Visual Studio is known as an IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment, but you can just think of it as a code editor. We'll also be providing a link to another resource called Scratch. Scratch was created at MIT and is a good way to play around with the basics of programming. It doesn't involve any typing, so a lot of times that ends up being a good starting point. Now, when we open up our Microsoft Visual Studio, I'm going to go to File, New Project. The project that we're going to be working with today is a console app. So once you select console app, you just give it a name. I've actually already created my program, as you can see back here, so I'm going to hit cancel. Now, a couple things before we start. This console.writeLine. Really all you need to worry about for now is that this is what we're going to use to print out our text. Console.readKey I throw at the very end just so that the system is expecting some sort of input so it doesn't immediately close as soon as it runs through the code. So if I run by clicking this run button up here, we can see hello world, which is exactly what we told it to say. Now, let's get started. The first building block we're going to be learning about is variables. You could think of variables as a way of storing values that you know you'll need later. Think of it as a box that holds some sort of value. Now, you can give variables names, which you can use to reference those, and you can also, in some programming languages, give it a type. C# is a language where we have to give it a type. So, when I create my variable, because we're going to be working with whole numbers today, I'm going to use the type integer. So to tell the program, I just say int. Now I give my variable a name. I'm going to use var as my variable name. So when I type this out, the system now knows we're going to be using a variable called var, and it's going to be an integer. Now, what can we do with this variable? Well, let's start by giving it a value. To set a value, all I need to do is type equals and then our value. If I take our console.writeLine up here, I can move it down and say our number is 5. However, that's not using our variable. So instead of just saying 5, I'm going to say our number is, and then I'm going to add our variable to the end of it. Now, because I'm using this plus sign, when this first bit is what's called a string, which is a series of text. This is just going to add our variable to the end of the text. So if I hit run, we can see our number is 5. Now, let's change our variable. We'll add another write line down here. Our number is now variable. We want our variable to be different. I could say variable is now equal to 6. However, there's a better way of doing that. Instead of just setting the value every time, I know I want to increase it by 1. So what I can say is var plus 1. What this tells the system is I'm going to take my variable, I'm going to add 1 to it, and then I'm going to store this in our variable. So if I run this again, we can see our number is 5, our number is now 6. However, there is an easier way of doing this. Instead of saying our variable is itself plus 1, I can shorten this down to variable plus equals 1. This just tells the system I'm going to be adding and then immediately setting our variable. So it adds 1 to itself. Now I could make this 2, and our number is now 7. However, if I go back to 1, there's an even easier way of doing this. If we're incrementing or decrementing our value by 1, I can instead just say plus plus. This only works if we're going up or down by 1. So this just tells the variable, take our variable and increase it by 1. So if I run this one more time, we can see our number is 5, our number is now 6. This will come in handy later, so remember that. If statements are one of the most basic ways of how you can add branching logic, so we're going to go over them now. To use an if statement, we set it up like this. We say if, then some parentheses, and then some curly brackets. There's a couple different parts to this. If tells the program we want to look at a specific case. That case is going to be in our parentheses. If whatever we put in the parentheses evaluates to true, it's going to run whatever code is in here. So if I add another console.writeLine in here, I can say I am here. Because we have true, we're going to run this code. So if I run it, we can see I am here. However, if whatever's in these parentheses is false, it will not run this code. And we can even see that our IDE is giving us a little hint about that. So if I run this code, we should not see I am here. Now, just setting this to true or just setting it to false isn't very helpful. What we can do is we can base this off of our variable. So I want to say whether or not our number is greater than 5. So I will say our number is greater than 5. Now, I can check this by taking our variable and checking if it's greater than 5. If our variable is greater than 5, this evaluates to true. So if I run this, because our value is 6, if you remember, it'll evaluate to true and our number is greater than 5. Now, I could copy paste this again. Maybe I want a case where our variable is less than 5. I can add that. I can change the comparison to less than, and I can change our output to say less than. However, if I run this, again, because our number is 6, this statement will evaluate to false because our variable is not less than 5, and so we will not run this code. Now, there's a better way of doing this. Instead of having two if statements, I know that it's probably going to be one or the other. So instead, I can say, if our variable is greater than 5, do this. Otherwise, do this. And to do that, I just turn this into else. The else goes along with the if. So what we're saying is, if this is true, do this. Otherwise, do this. Now, if I run this, we won't see this again because our number is greater than 5. So let's change this up a little bit. We'll switch these around. So we'll check if it's less than 5. Otherwise, we'll print that it's greater than 5. We can see our number is still greater than 5. Now, these are not the only two possibilities. Sometimes our number may be equal to 5. If we say, if we're checking against 6, this is actually going to still evaluate to false because 6 is not less than 6. 6 is equal to 6. But then this isn't quite right either. So if I run this, it's going to try and say our number is greater than 5, which just isn't true. we want to add a case for if our variable is equal to 6. What we can do is what's called an else if statement. It's kind of adding a third layer in between these two. So we'll say else and then if. What this does is it now says if variable equals 6, we're going to say console.writeLine our number is 6. I'm also going to update this text a little bit just to reflect our new comparison. So, a couple things to note. You may have noticed that I used 2 equal signs here. That's because one equal sign, if you remember up here, is setting our value. If we're wanting to compare it, we have to use 2 equals. So what it'll do is it checks if our variable is greater than 6. If it's not, we'll go to this one and we'll check, is our variable equal to 6? If it still isn't, we'll go to the else. Now, if our variable is less than 6, it'll go into this bit of code and skip everything else. So if we run this one more time, we can see our number is 6. Maybe we want to check 2 statements at the same time. We could use this. I'm going to simplify this down a little bit more. So maybe what we want to check for isn't whether or not our number is higher, lower, or equal to another number. Maybe we want to know our number is between 5 and 10. So I'm going to set this back to, is our number greater than 5? It is. But that's not the only thing we want to check for. We also want to check it based off of if it's less than 10. What we can do is we can actually check both of those at the same time. I'm going to do and bar less than 10. What this does is it checks this, is our variable greater than 5? And then it'll check, is our variable less than 10? Both of these have to be true in order to run this code. So if our number was 11, we would check, is our variable greater than 5? Yes. But is our variable less than 10? No. So we would skip this. Same as if it was 4. Is our variable greater than 5? No, it's not. And it'll actually stop right there because we already have our false, so it'll skip this code. If I run this now, we can see our number is between 5 and 10. Now, our final piece of the puzzle that we're going to be going over today is called a for loop. For loops are one way to run the same section of code multiple times. For loops also incorporate all our other pieces that we've covered today. So, I'm going to remove my if statement, and I'm going to say for, give it our parentheses, and curly brackets again. So we'll cover the parentheses in a little bit, but the curly brackets contains the code that we want to run multiple times. So we're going to count from 1 to 10. We're not going to use our variable that we created before, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these. Now, inside our parentheses are going to be 3 key parts, all separated by semicolons. The first part is just setting up a counting variable. So we're going to use our variable setting knowledge to say, we're going to set a counting variable. This time we're just going to call it I. This tells the system we have a variable of I. It's an integer. We're going to start it out at 1. Now we can say, every time we loop through this, we want to print out our number. The second piece of the puzzle is going to tell the loop when it's going to stop. So this middle one is going to look a lot like our statement in our if statement. So I'm going to say, as long as I is less than 11, we're going to keep looping through this. And our final piece of the puzzle is what we do at the end of every loop. So if we were to just leave it at this, it would loop infinitely because I is always going to be 1 and 1 is always going to be less than 11. So we want to tell it at the end of every loop, we're going to take I and we're going to increase it by 1. So one more time, we're going to take our number, we're setting it to 1 at the beginning. We're going to run this code as long as I is less than 11. And after every pass through this loop, we're going to increase I by 1. So if I run this, we can see it counts up. Now, we're going to take all these pieces and we're going to write a little program called FizzBuzz. So, I'm going to go ahead and copy what FizzBuzz is. I'm going to take out what we've written so far, and I'm going to replace it with what's called a code comment. Code comments have this // in between them. This is kind of a way of you to put text in the middle of your program, usually just to explain kind of what some code's doing, without it actually being run as part of the code. So our problem is this. We want to print all the numbers from 1 to 100. If the number is divisible by 3, we're going to print fizz instead of the number. If our number is divisible by 5, we want to print buzz instead of the number. If the number is divisible by both 3 and 5, we want to print fizzbuzz instead of the number. So, to start out, we're going to use our good old pal, the for loop. So, we're going to, again, all we're going to do is just write out our number. We're going to set our number to 1. We're going to keep going as long as our number is less than 101. And at the end of all of our loops, we're going to increment I by 1. If we run this, we get all of our numbers from 1 to 100. I'll have to scroll up to see all of them, but they're there. Now, that's the first part done. The next part is to check if our number is divisible by 3. Now, there is a trap hidden as part of this program. See if you can figure it out before we get to it. So, if our number is divisible by 3, we want to print fizz instead. So I'm going to say console.writeLine fizz. So we want to take our variable and we want to compare it to 3. Now we haven't checked for divisibility yet, but how we can do that is we can use what's called as the modular operator. We can take I modular 3. What this does is it takes I and divides it by 3. Because we're working with whole numbers, this will actually return our remainder. So if I is divisible by 3 equally, our remainder is going to be 0. So we're saying if we take I and divide it by 3, if our remainder is 0, we know it's divisible by 3. So we'll write fizz. If I run this now, we can see that every 3 numbers, we type fizz. Now, we're still getting 3 and 6 and 9. So that just tells us we have to put our else statement here so that we're not typing the number every time. We're only typing the number if it's not divisible by 3. That's not the trap I was talking about, but something to catch while we're making this. Now, we've got our 3. We can pretty much copy paste this in an else if statement and do the same thing for 5. This time, printing buzz. We can see 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, fizz. Now, when we get to 15, this is our first number that's divisible by both. We're printing fizz. That's because we're hitting this first statement and we're saying 15 is divisible by 3. So we're going to print fizz. Program's doing exactly what we told it to do. And it'll skip everything else because it's in an else if statement and else statement. So we want to add our third and final case. If the number is divisible by 3, and it's divisible by 5, so we'll use our AND operators again. Then we can write fizzbuzz. You might note that you can string along multiple else ifs, just to give it even more branching paths. Now, have you noticed the trap yet? If we run this code, we can see that the first time we get to a number that's divisible by both, 15, it still says buzz. Now, that's because the first check we're looking for is if it's divisible by 3. If it's divisible by both, it doesn't care. It found its first case, it's going to run it. So, to fix this trap, all we need to do is do our check for both at the very beginning. I'm going to swap these around. So now we check. If it's divisible by both, write fizzbuzz. If it's just divisible by 5, write buzz. If it's just divisible by 3, write fizz. Otherwise, write the number. If we run this one more time, this should be correct. So we can see 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, fizz, all the way down to 15 is where we get our first fizz buzz. And that's about it. Now, thank you for watching this video. And remember, check the lib guide that goes along with this video to find some helpful resources. Thanks for watching.